Hello, great souls. Welcome to our satsang talk. We will be looking still at chapter 12, and I believe probably next week as well. It's quite a full chapter, just rich with so much, and I don't want to rush through it. So let's begin together with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, we humbly bow to you all. Guide us as we continue studying this great sacred text. Help us to receive the blessings that are offered, to apply them to our journey, and to awaken with your support, your presence in thee. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay, so chapter 12, Years in My Master's Hermitage. Let's see, here we are. So I believe last time I ended with Yogananda returning home and letting his father know that he would be going to college. And his father was very happy. He said to Yogananda that he was very pleased that Yogananda found his guru close by, because Yogananda was always feeling called to go to the Himalayas and go off to the distance. And it was a sweet discovery and a blessing for his dad that he could be close to home, and also that he could go back to school. So his father made arrangements for that. And then Yogananda goes on to talk about his life in the hermitage. And he describes the daily routine of Sri Yukteswar and these beautiful, amazing evening dissertations that would happen spontaneously. He said that if there was sincere interest of the devotee, then Sri Yukteswar would just talk, and sometimes all through the night. And suddenly you'd realize that it was daytime, and they would go and walk along the Ganges. And Yogananda just describes it so beautifully, what it was like. And as he writes about it, he says it's still fresh in his memory. You know, he recalls it vividly. The other thing he talked about, and as always, the chapter is sprinkled with humor. It's beautifully written. He talked about his experience with Sri Yukteswar, one, going into samadhi. So Sri Yukteswar, when he would wake up, he would either remain lying still or he would sit up, and then he would go into the divine state of samadhi. And Yogananda could tell the difference because when Sri Yukteswar was sleeping, he was snoring. So apparently he had a deep snore. And then suddenly the snore would go away and there would be no sound at all. And he would be in breathlessness. Yogananda also describes his first experience of close-up observing that Sri Yukteswar had gone breathless. And this is intertwined with a story about the mosquitoes. So there's a humorous experience in a story. He says a few different things about the mosquitoes. So first let me stick with breathlessness. He was waiting for his guru to give the command of, or I don't know if it was a command so much as he would say, let's close the bed curtains. And I'll tell you about that story in a moment. And he didn't on this particular night. And so Yogananda very anxiously was, waiting to get the news. And he got up and he crept to Sri Yukteswar's bed to, he'd already tried waking, coughing and doing things to get his attention that didn't seem to work. And when he got close up, he could see that Sri Yukteswar was motionless. And it startled him, and he looked closer and could see he wasn't breathing, and that was frightening to him. So he actually closed his nose. He put a mirror underneath his nose. Nope, no air, no breath. Closed his nose. He kept pinching it closed and opening it. And, clearly he wasn't breathing. So he thought, oh my gosh, he's died. So he starts to run. And just as he's running, Sri Yukteswar calls out to him, and then chides him a little bit and says, calls him an experimentalist, right? Because he said, my poor nose. And, Yogananda was so startled by this, but it was his experience of, his first experience of understanding that Sri Yukteswar had gone into a deep state that is known as the breathless state. There's actually a poster when Yogananda was touring the States, and he would give all these different kinds of lectures, and he performed quite a few miraculous feats, and part of that was to demonstrate, right, the power of God. So one of the posters described a workshop he was giving. I wish I could remember the exact wording. It was, but anyways, it was super advanced yogic workshop. And then you read underneath how to attain the breathless state. That is super advanced. So at first when you see the title, you think, well, what is this? But anyway, I will talk a little bit about our techniques in terms of Hong Sa. So Hong Sa is a meditation technique that Yogananda brought to the West, and we teach it here at Ananda, and sometimes is referred to as baby Kriya. So you'll know in Autobiography of a Yogi, the Kriya technique is the supreme meditation technique that Yogananda brought, given to him through his guru, through Lahiri Mahashaya, through Babaji. And so Hong Sa actually is, you can attain breathlessness with Hong Sa. And one of the things that will happen is a very thin breath. Like the breath just more and more becomes unnecessary. And it's not that everyone will achieve breathlessness, but it can happen. That's why I'm mentioning it. Part of the journey with the practice of yoga, with meditation, is moving from an outward state of awareness of our senses to an inner reality. And that's what Yogananda talks about. He begins to talk about here with his master going into samadhi. In fact, says that Sri Yukteswar was a living presence of God. He makes that's one of the statements that he makes. So he was always in communion. Now, as it turns out, Yogananda is also a master, so the same was true of him, right? But he tells the story beautifully of a soul in on a quest, a spiritual quest, to find his guru and to have God realization. It's sometimes referred to as the Leela, the divine play that Yogananda acts out for us, because he came here, this incarnation, he was already self-realized. But his journey, his incarnation, is such a blessing to us because he goes through the stages of a soul on a journey of spiritual awakening. And it is demonstrated through him the kinds of things we would experience in our spiritual journey. Finding a teacher, having the experience of, ultimately, could be in this lifetime for you, finding a guru. That might be, we had a beautiful ceremony yesterday as part of Sunday service of a discipleship ceremony. And this is something, a vow that people take when they feel called within themselves to this path and to these masters, and in particular to Yogananda. And it was talked about yesterday that the teachings can be shared, but discipleship itself is very personal and individual. And that's something we come to ourselves. If it's right for us, it happens within us. It's a flowering, a blossoming that happens. It's a beautiful thing. And this is true, I have observed as we progress on our spiritual path, when we find what's right for us, we know it inside. It resonates. It's one of the guidelines for truth, is to pay attention for an inner sense of resonance and rightness. And so here, this practice, this understanding of what it is to find a teacher, teachings, a guru, and then what happens for the soul. So Yogananda shares also in this chapter some of his lessons, his early lessons, and one of them was on ahimsa, nonviolence. So back to the mosquitoes, right? There are several parts they play. So initially, one of the things he mentioned is that as a boy in his family home, they had mosquito nets to protect the bed. And in the ashram, they didn't have that. So he was being bitten from head to toe. And at a certain point, Sri Yukteswar said, why don't you get yourself a bed curtain? And then said, and get me one as well, because if you have one, all the mosquitoes will come to me. Later, what Yogananda realized is Sri Yukteswar did not need that curtain. He was doing that for Yogananda, and then later would use that as a teaching. So the night when they didn't do the curtain, and he discovered his guru was breathless, he was removed from any outer reality, right? He was removed from that. So what Yogananda said is that either the mosquitoes would avoid him, or Sri Yukteswar would be so withdrawn from the senses and the material realm that they would not touch him, right? They wouldn't touch his consciousness. So one way or another, he wouldn't be bothered by them. And this was part of the teaching. With ahimsa, Yogananda talks about a day when he was sitting with his guru, listening to a talk on the scripture, and as he was listening, a mosquito pierced, he said a hypodermic needle of the mosquito, so it's very vivid, pierced his thigh, and instantly he went to swat it, right? It was just instinctual that he went to swat it. And then he remembered a teaching from Patanjali about ahimsa, nonviolence. So he stopped himself. He didn't hit the mosquito. And just then, Sri Yukteswar interrupted and said, why not finish the job? And that surprised Yogananda because of ahimsa. Like, well, sir, should I really do that? I mean, are we supposed to not be violent? And what Sri Yukteswar taught him is he said, you'd already delivered the death blow. Meaning his thoughts, he already had the intention of killing the mosquito. So not doing it wasn't enough to reverse or to fully practice ahimsa. Ahimsa is more than outward action. So what he taught Yogananda is that it has to do with our attitude. Ahimsa, sometimes Sri Yukteswar said the world is set up in such a way that you can't actually practice it literally, perfectly. We will kill insects and bugs. There are times when, excuse me, we may have to kill another living creature or plant, right? So what he said is the consciousness that we hold when such an action is taken is what makes it ahimsa or not. While we may have to, in certain circumstances, kill something, we don't ever have to do that with a desire to injure, a desire to hurt. So non-harmfulness is about the attitude that we carry, a deep respect for life, an appreciation for all of life. And then later, Yogananda asked Sri Yukteswar about when you're evaluating life, whether it be an animal or a human being, is it ever a good idea to sacrifice your physical life for an animal rather than kill an animal? Kill another creature, is what he said. And Sri Yukteswar said no, that the human body is actually advanced, the most advanced in terms of evolutionary progress. And this has to do with the way that our brain is designed, the function, the way the brain is, the way our human brain and our nervous system. One of Yogananda's famous lines is that God is realized through the nervous system, which is, to me, was always a very stunning thing to hear. I'd never heard anything like that before. And in the teaching of yoga, we come to understand astral anatomy. What does it mean to realize super consciousness through our physical body, through our nervous system? And it has to do, again, with this withdrawal of our consciousness and awareness from the senses, the five senses, to an inner reality of this. It's called the Sushumna, which is a channel of energy within us. And that goes along the physical spine. It's basically located in that area. You can't see it. So if you cut open a body, you can't see the Sushumna. It's energy. But that Sushumna is the central channel. And all of our yogic practices increase our ability to withdraw from the five senses to that central reality. And then the energy is lifted to the point between the eyebrows. And this opens. And we, in this place of awareness, are able to perceive and realize the divine, superconscious state, our own inner divinity. And we have glimpses of this along the way. So it's not like one day, here I am in my five senses, and the next day it could happen that way. But generally it's incremental. It's more, Swami Kriyananda said, even a thought of kindness or compassion is what will lift us into a super conscious. It lifts the energy here, raising what's called the Kundalini energy at the base of the spine. And that can rise through compassion and kindness, positive uplifting thoughts. So there's small steps we can take to awaken the energy and lift us. And over time we change. One of my favorite things that Swami Kriyananda said about spiritual progress is, first he said, if you need to evaluate your spiritual progress, and then he paused and said, which I don't recommend, but if you need to, if you feel you need to, which most of us feel we need to, we want to know, how am I doing? How well is it going? He said, I recommend doing it in decades. I didn't look at your life in decades. That's a long time, right? But usually, if you've been active, making an attempt toward a spiritual life, you can tell in 10 years things are different. You can. I've seen that. Like, wow, that is actually a great length of time. 10 years, you can see a difference. And then he said, and if that feels too long, if a decade feels too long, 1 or 2 years. Give it 1 or 2 years. I've seen that too. 1 or 2 years, yes, I can see a difference, right? It's much harder a month at a time. It's much harder a week at a time, day at a time. I mean, in that short amount of time, even 6 months, although Dr. Peter, he's a doctor with Ananda that focuses on the brain. I'm trying to remember, Van Houten, Dr. Peter Van Houten. You can find him online. He gives wonderful talks about what I'm mentioning here, right, that Yogananda taught, is how our brain and our body, our nervous system, is beautifully wired and magnificently, well, it's called neuroplasticity. It's pliable. So who we are today, we're not frozen in that. We don't have to be that forever. There's a lot that we can do to change our life. And one of Dr. Peter's talks is, he said at the beginning, he likes to ask his audience, who would you like to be 6 months from now? So he actually does use a 6-month period because a lot of science has demonstrated changes that can happen in that period of time, especially with meditation and breathing techniques. It's amazing the difference that can happen, the changes that can take root within us and within our life. So I will say that a 6-month period can be a reasonable time. But in general, it's helpful to focus on one day at a time, doing your best and trusting that it's working, right? It's good. It is good to check in with teachers from time to time and ask them, how do I seem to be doing? A good spiritual teacher will be honest and will help you. And what I found with when I'm choosing a teacher, and I've chosen teachers, I have spiritual teachers here at Ananda, but over the years before I found Ananda, I was also had other teachers. So what I looked for was a teacher, as I was saying earlier, that struck a chord of resonance within me. I felt that what they were saying resonated with a knowing inside of me. So it gave me a feeling of yes, I can trust them. Yes, that feels true. I remember I've heard Asha tell this story a number of times when she first met Swami Kriyananda. And she, prior to meeting him, was very, very interested in spiritual life. She was studying the teachings of self-realization. She didn't know how to apply them. She loved them, but she couldn't quite figure out how to apply them in her life, to live them. And the moment that she met, and she, when I say met, she was at a talk with quite a few people at this talk, so she was a distance from Swami. He walked in the room, and as soon as she saw him, it resonated. She recognized he has it. He has it. He has what I'm looking for. She didn't even, she said she couldn't even have articulated exactly what it was, but the moment she saw him, she knew he had what she was looking for. And all the years that she spent with him, 40 or more, I'm not sure now, that remained true, right? That never changed for her. That she always saw, always experienced that Swami Kriyananda had that consciousness, that level of realization of the spiritual teachings that could show her the way. And he had the ability, I've heard many people say this. I had my own experience with him speaking to me one time, where he could tune into where you are and offer for you your next step. And that's an important aspect as well in teachings and in your own spiritual journey, is to ask yourself, what am I ready for? So I'll go back to this discipleship ceremony. Discipleship, very sacred, very beautiful. At the same time, it's not where everyone is. And not to feel like, oh, I can't progress on the spiritual path because that having a guru doesn't resonate for me. If it doesn't resonate, look for what does. Right? One of the things that I love about the spiritual journey and the teachings of yoga is that God is infinite, omnipresent, and abundant, loves each one of us dearly, and will bring to us what we are ready for. Right? What does resonate? What does feel right? And each time we encounter that, we grow, we expand, our life becomes more than it was. And that's part of what the journey is about, is what's the next step that helps my consciousness expand? What's the next thing that I can do that really does feel right for me? So, okay, so other aspects of chapter 12. One of the things that Sri Yukteswar or Yogananda talks about is that Sri Yukteswar's diet, he was vegetarian. That being so, he mentioned that prior to being a vegetarian, he had eaten eggs and fish, and his advice to students was to follow any simple diet which proved suited to one's constitution. So this is important in terms of yoga practice and yoga lifestyle, to be discerning about what actually works for you. And I'll put it in the same context of what I was saying, what's your next step? If we take on something that is more extreme than we're ready for, we set ourselves up for battling with what we've chosen. Right? And the mind can think, the conscious mind comes up with ideas and can feel like, oh, I've heard this is good, so I'll do it. Well, it can be very good if it suits you. And if it doesn't suit you, we want to practice the yama of non-lying, of self-honesty, and to know that again, God, the gurus, the teachings will work with us where we are. It's far better to choose a diet that you can, that's healthy for you and works for you, than to take on something you find yourself struggling with constantly. And I will say it's a balancing act, because we teach this in our yoga postures. There's a discernment when you're practicing a yoga posture. You want to have enough challenge to be engaged. So you want to feel like it's requiring something of you. It ought to require something of you, but you don't want it to require so much of you that you can't wait for it to end. Right? That the entire time you're thinking, when is this over? When is this over? When is this over? Or like with diet, you can't wait to break it. Right, so you're like you feel like you're in a corral and you're doing it, but you become obsessed with not doing it. Right, get me out of this, and that's a sign it's too much for you. So on the other hand, in terms of health, we don't want to simply give in to eating that isn't actually supporting our health and our well-being. Yogananda taught a balanced life. He very much said, the body, it's so interesting because we tend to the body and to our physical health. It's sometimes thought of as a stepping stone. It can really help us in our spiritual life. It's not at all a requirement to be healthy, to be self-realized. Lots of saints have physical challenges, right? So physical health is a benefit. It makes meditating easier. It makes everything in the spiritual life easier if we have physical health. And out of respect for our physical body, it's good to tend to that. But in our yoga practice, we don't want to be so focused on our health that we become obsessed with that as the goal. It's not the goal. It is a means that can help the end of realization. In our culture, in our Western culture, I will say, I don't know if it's especially true with yoga, but it is easy to become mistaken about that. It's very easy. In our culture, we love the look of health, is what I've observed. We like what looks like it's health, but the pathway to get there is often not balanced. It's not a balanced way to get there. And things are taken care of at the cost of others, right? So, okay, physical body looks good. Where's the mind? How's the mind doing? Is the mind healthy? And what I mean by that is, what are you feeding your mind? In yoga, we look at all of that. We look at health in the holistic perspective. Another aspect of the chapter, a very important one, is on thought and the power of thought, and how thought itself transforms the health. So there's some stories in here, amazing stories, that Sri Yukteswar, first it's with Yogananda, and then Sri Yukteswar tells his own journey. I'm laughing because it's quite humorous, with his master, Lahiri Mahashaya, who's saying to him one day, he said, "Master, I'm sick." "You are sick." And he feels sick. "Don't worry about it. You're well." Then he seems well. He comes back. "Thank you so much. You've made me well." "Oh, I don't know how long it will last." And then he's sick again. And he finally realizes that Lahiri is testing him, and he challenges him and says, "You've been testing me. One day I'm well, the next day I'm sick." And then Lahiri says, "You're right." Right? He just wanted to show him the power of thought. And so then he says, you will be well. And that very day, which is still astonishing to me, he literally gained 50 pounds. That's just, it's miraculous, of course, but I can't even imagine. He went home, his mother was terrified. She said, "Are you swelling up?" Right? He weighed himself. He weighed 50 pounds more, which for his body was healthy because he'd lost so much weight. So the diet, I'll wrap up with this for today. In terms of diet, in terms of our life and our journey, it's this in evaluating for yourself what's working and how to choose. Listen for a sense of inner resonance. And I will offer as well a sense of expanded Today I'll say joy. I'd listen for that. I listen for that in my choices. Even when I'm doing something difficult, if it's the right thing for me, it increases the joy that I experience. That's a divine quality, Yogananda said, of God. So, Swami said in meditation, meditate to the point of joy. So listen for joy this week. That's my invitation for you, and whatever you're choosing. And honor that inner voice of truth and resonance. Okay, great souls. Great to be with you today. Many blessings.